server rendered HTML all the way to now we're going to just do the whole thing in JavaScript. If you don't have JavaScript enabled, you cannot use our website. It created an interesting era. So it created the great divide. So we had one camp, whom, again, this is oversimplification. This is Dan Abramov. If anyone knows him, he was the creator of Redux, which is a React tool for managing state. I'm going to use him as a representation of the JavaScript all the way camp. So their perspective was the front end, the JavaScript is everything. Everything lives on the client. Do all that we can on the client side. The back end only exists just to feed me the JavaScript files from the server. Now on the other camp, we have this man, DHH, known and beloved internet troll who has lots of great hot takes. David Hannemeyer Hansen, who actually is a genius and a cool guy. He loves the back end. He's the creator of Ruby on Rails. He says the back end is where the action is, pun intended, for actions. And then the front end, the JavaScript on the front end only exists to swap my server rendered HTML from different tools from my back end, from Ruby, whatever. So those are the two camps. There's two extremes that we have. So what if you like both of those things though? What if you like server stuff and you like front end? You like front end frameworks. I like Vue. I like Svelte. I like React is okay. So why can't we have both? So like, what if it was like, what if I liked building my UIs on the front end, but I also liked doing stuff from my back end? I liked getting state from my back end and doing stuff with it. I liked getting, making my requests, whatever. But there's some considerations when you have a back end and a front end that are kind of separate, hosted maybe on different domains, which is pretty common. You have front end routes. You're using a front end router like React Router or other routing tools. You kind of have to live in both places. You have to define your back end routes, and you can't mix those with your front end routes. Another thing is state management. So how do you fetch things from the back end and manage that state on the front end? What if your different components need this access to the same state? How do we solve that problem? An API. So now you have to build out a full-fledged API to serve your front end for requests.
Authentication is kind of tricky. How are you going to authenticate requests if you need to? Tokens, cookies, all that good stuff. It kind of gets messy quickly. And now everyone's favorite is cross-origin resource sharing.
It's a great security tool, but it's really hard to get right, which I guess is a good thing ultimately, but it can be a huge headache. So now this is where Inertia kind of comes into the scene. I'm saying having your cake and eat it too, because you get a lot of great benefits from Inertia. So Inertia takes the best of both worlds and then kind of combines it into what they call a hybrid SPA, so a hybrid single-page application. It's still a single-page application, but actually your backend does most of the driving, so to speak. Your backend defines all the routes. You don't have to worry about a front-end router. And it does a little bit of trickery to help you and leverage the power of front-end frameworks to do what they're meant to do and give you really great overall experience. So you get to keep the ergonomics of building a UI with your favorite front-end framework, and you don't have to you can build great interactive UIs pretty easily because that's what they're built for. And then Inertia handles the state that's been provided by the backend. And we'll see some examples of what that looks like, but you don't so much have to think about dedicated API endpoints to retrieve certain things. If you have a /users route that just gets a list of users and you have to paginate all of that kind of stuff, and then a separate route to get something else, we can actually provide that a lot easier with Inertia. And you don't need that formal API. We don't need to create kind of like that traditional view of like a REST API. We can of course keep doing that, but we can do it a little bit uniquely and kind of have those one-off endpoints that are actually really easy to manage. And then we can use your backend's authentication, which is great because most frameworks have really built-in, really easy session authentication. So that's really great. And then you don't have to do any more cores because everything is on the same machine. You're serving just HTML from your server just like normal. And you don't have to do any cross-origin stuff with that, except when you want to. So how does it work? Like where's the magic? So it's not a framework, but they call themselves kind of a protocol. And this makes it framework agnostic both on the front end and the back end. It's kind of just like a philosophy of, how we're gonna send and receive requests, what's the back end gonna send, how's the front end gonna make requests. And so that makes it's not tied to any single framework, which is great for adaptability. They call themselves basically like a client-side routing library. What that means is, we'll see later, that it kind of handles the routing part that you don't think about really easily. And they do this by using just some pretty clever request headers and then adapting that in the back end. So the front end, again, it's agnostic, like you could build it in whatever, you could build your own inertia adapter, whatever framework you want. So it makes a request. Inertia is the one that handles the request. You tell your front-end framework, hey, Inertia, I want this route or this page. Inertia makes the request to the back end. Again, it's agnostic because it doesn't matter. It just wants it in a certain format. The back end sends it back to Inertia. Inertia lets the front-end framework do its magic, and voila, we have a single-page application pretty quickly and easily. So it's all in your headers. The initial page load is just a normal HTML response. It has to get HTML somehow. And then their Inertia boots up basically your root element that has encoded JSON in it with all the initial page, whatever page you're accessing, could be any arbitrary page, based on the framework that you want, however that is done. And then every subsequent request, Inertia is the one that's saying, hey, I want this route. And it sets some headers like X Inertia header to let the backend know, hey, this is an Inertia request. Don't send any JSON, don't send HTML, I want it this way. And then your adapter is the one that handles that request and formats it exactly how you need. Inertia, so how it works is the backend will just tell you, hey, this page, this route, let's just say /users, it uses a users component, which is just a page. And then here's the props that they would need. Again, any arbitrary props that page would need. And we can have what's called shared props even. So every single request will always send a group of props. That way every page has it. For example, like if you're logged in, maybe you would have a user account as every single request because every page wants to know who the user is. And it's also code splittable, which is great. Makes for really great small requests. Contains the component name, the props, and the version, which is actually pretty clever. So for cache busting, so let's say people are using your site and you've pushed an update, and actually the backend has built, or the build is new, it's different. Actually, the JavaScript files aren't there anymore that were there, and just through a clever versioning system, usually it's just a hash of a build manifest file, for example. Hey, that file's changed. Actually, just do a fresh, hard refresh. Just get the page all fresh again, and then you have your correct JavaScript references and all that, and you're done. You're rolling. It's actually really smooth. And then based on that response, the front end just does its job. The front end just renders correctly. Whether it's Vue, whether it's React, it does its job. And right now, there's a new version that's in beta that actually allows you to do some really cool things that I'll kind of demo. But it supports partial reloads. So for example, if you only want a certain amount of state to refresh, you can request just that part, and then all your other stuff is still exactly the same. It doesn't have to re-render anything, because JavaScript frameworks nowadays are really clever in how they manipulate the DOM, so you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. And we'll go over some examples later. So, anyone familiar with Deno? Have you guys heard of Deno? Deno is a JavaScript runtime, much like Node.js, and actually was created by the creator of Node.js in a weird twist of fate. But kind of like, if I could do Node again, this is what I would do, and he made Deno. It has a lot of cool things like built-in TypeScript support if you're into that. A lot of other great standard library. It's kind of his vision for what a really great server-side JavaScript environment would look like. So just to demonstrate like how easy it is to get like a really basic backend adapter, we're gonna build one in Deno, hopefully live. So we'll see what happens. I'm also using a new editor called Zed. Has anybody heard of that? Yeah. Anybody? I think it's pretty cool. Anybody's experience? Yeah. Cool. I'm gonna make this. So it's gonna have a lot of squiggly stuff because again, Deno is kind of new, and so kind of the language servers aren't quite all the way there for some reason. But I'm gonna start with this boilerplate. So this is using a tool called Oak. Oak is just a middleware framework. And so Deno is really, really simple to get a simple web server going. It has actually a built-in one itself. And so this just kind of overlays on top of that to kind of give you an easy experience, like just building middleware, which also routes are just middleware. So I have just this really base state here. So I'm running this page. It's nothing there yet, just this simple page. And you can see here, if we go to here, I have this, I'm just creating this inertia object, and I'm just calling this toHTML response, and I'm giving it the context. The context has like the request data, and then you can set the response data of how the web server should respond. So in this, I just am returning some static HTML with, I'm right here, I'm just stringifying some JSON. Right now it's nothing because we don't have anything. And then it's just running Vite in the background. So right now you can see there's the data page. It just has, just an empty object. So what we can do is here, let's just change this. I'm going to borrow another framework's, Laravel's adapter, kind of the language that they use that makes sense. So we're going to want to render a page, and then we're going to tell the component, in this case, it's just index. So on the front end, how we get this set up is this is just copy and paste from Inertia's client setup page. All this does is it's going to look for a component in the pages folder, and you can be nested as well when you pass it back. And then it's just going to, I'm using Vue, so then it's just going to automatically append the Vue file extension for me, and then that's it. Like this is just their standard bootstrapping thing for Inertia. So when we refresh now, it's not going to like it because I'm not actually returning anything. Actually, right now it's broken anyway, but we're not giving it the stuff that it wants. So here we're saying the index, which is going to live here in this pages folder here, and it's just very, very basic. I'm getting my props, and I want a user prop, and I'm expecting it to be an object, and then I'm just going to spit it out just so we can see it. So we've got to finish creating our render function here. So we're going to take into context object, and then we know that we're going to have a component name, and that's going to be a string, and then we're going to have props. We're going to pass the props wherever we want, and that's just going to be an object, just a generic object. So let's set some instance variables. You can say, let's do everything from public for now. That, and then we'll just set a version for now. We're not going to mess with version, but we'll just call it that. So then we can just set some properties. We'll let Copilot do some things for me. So now what do we need to do? So we have this great toHTML response, but how do we know when to send HTML and when to send inertia? And that's through the props. So then we can, I have up here already hard-coded the main header keys that we care about. So first thing, we're just going to check if the request is asking for inertia, and that's on the request object. It's just headers.get. we're just going to check. So this is just looking for the X inertia key there. And here we'll know, hey, we just need to return an inertia response. Otherwise, we can just return the HTML response. And how we do that is we can just call that's the same one we were calling before. But we also need to provide our props here because inertia is going to expect props in a certain way. So for now, we can just say, we'll just call this props. So we'll stringify that. So now we can just set our props here. So we can just say, we're just going to do a user, just do a random UUID, email, and then we'll do name. Great. So now if we refresh the page, of course, let's double check, make sure everything's still running. Doesn't oh yeah, because I'm wrapping it in an object. If you see something, say something. Let's see. Okay. So now if we look here, we can see that we are getting some props through, but we're not there yet. If we look at the console, it's saying, hey, we can't read products of undefined. It's still wanting it in a certain way. So we need to fix that. So let's replace this props with like a function call. Let's just say we'll call it get props. Here. And from this we'll return just an object. So what it wants is we want the component name, because that's what's built here. So we want to get past it the component name. So again, modern JavaScript can do some pretty clever globbing for us and pick the right file for us. And later on for code splitting, it actually makes it really, really easy to code split. Just thanks to modern JavaScript development. We'll set the props to this props, and then version. Set the version, and then it also kind of likes a URL. So when we can just let's take in a request object here, and we'll pass that from the context. And then we'll say request, path name from the request, and we'll call that. So now let's see if it doesn't, don't want to go undefined. There. So now it bootstrapped for us, it loaded the page, and this is completely a view page, provided all of the backend, provided everything that we needed for our front end to render, and we're good to go. So now we can just pass in any arbitrary things that we want into this into our props here, and that way we don't have to make multiple requests to a dedicated API, whether it's GraphQL, REST, or whatever. It just makes it really, really easy to add arbitrary things, and we don't have to worry about it on the front end, making all these requests. How do we authenticate? Are they authenticated? What happens if something goes wrong? All those kind of things. It's just spit out as JSON, and then the page renders for us. So let's build our next page. I think I called this slash page. So what happens when we want to now let's navigate to a page. So instead of it, inertia is going to help this wrap. So when we go to this page, nothing happens. This is kind of inertia's throw up its hand and say, I don't know what happened. It didn't go right though. So I didn't actually go anywhere except it just threw a modal and saying, oh, it's 404 not found. It's not built yet. So now we can just do the same thing. And I have my other page here just called page.view. So then we can say, give it our context and then say page. And then let's look at our component to see kind of what I'm expecting. So I have a value. We have this deferred here, but let's not worry about that. And then just another user object. So I'm just going to take this user here. I'm going to kind of make it global for now. And we'll still return it here. Because remember, Inertia can also do shared state. And that's really on the back end to how we manage that. So we can just do that later. I'll say user, because we want the user object, and then just value just a random UUID. So when I do this, it kind of helps, but it's kind of embedded in this weird page because Inertia it got HTML back and not what it expected. So if we look at this page, the response is this. So because we haven't implemented that part. So here's where we're going to be. So we can just say, just to see what's happening here, we can look at our kind of server log here. When we hit this, so it detected inertia request detected. So okay, great. So it is sending this header for us. So now we just need to return JSON, just like what we're setting here. When we're stringifying these props, we just need to send the props now as JSON. So we can just say we'll want to set the response body to just be this type props, and then we'll just return out of this because we don't need to do anything else. And this wants our request. So now we're back to our original page. Everything is working okay. As you can see, it's loading fine. Notice that the UID is just generated once the server restarts. So here, a plain JSON response was received. But I thought that's what it wanted. The trick is that we also need to tell Inertia's response that we need to set those headers again, because that's how it's actually really, really clever on how it detects that. So we're going to abstract this again just to its own function, and we're going to call it to Inertia response. Thanks, Copilot. You're great. So there, and we don't want to return anything. That's fine. So we'll set the props, but we also need to set the request back. The header, we need to send the headers back in the request as well, or the response. I'm sorry. We can set.
So it's supposed to be respond or response.
It's supposed to be response. Good catch. And then we'll just say this is true. Tree. Great. So everything is loading, and now we got the page navigated. We have history for us because it's automatically appending the history for us, and then it's spitting out our other page. Great. So now we can just go back and we can navigate just fine, and these requests are just sending JSON. And you can see the headers are here. So it's expecting Inertia. It's setting other headers that we're not worrying about at this moment. So that's great. But what happens now, actually, we're always sending a user because we always care who the user's logged in as. So what we can do is we can create this concept called shared props. And those are meant to be used on every single page. So usually those are done in a middleware. So here in my middleware, where I'm just creating that new response factory, I'm just going to go ahead and kind of, how do I want this to work? So yeah, Inertia again, or Copilot. So we want to just share some props, and we want to share the user that's set here. And we can let's move this down now to where it was. So every request, we're going to share this prop. And that way here, I don't have to use it anymore. I don't need to set it here either. And we can always get it just from this middleware, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. So let's finish implementing this share, and I'm going to default this to be that we don't have any problems. So let's do Copilot. So we're going to set some props. We want to preserve the current props that we have, so those don't get lost. If they're set, depending on where we set the shared props, we could share it anywhere we wanted, so we don't want to lose those. And then we're going to override them with whatever we're sharing. And then we'll just return this. So now we're setting our props to be the props that we set in our inertia response, but also we're going to share them from here. So if everything's working right, go back. Let's see. So we're expecting the user. Oh, hang on. We need to create a separate shared props. So we're just going to set it separately there. Because we don't want to actually override them from the... yeah. So then in... oh, the font's so big, it's hard to see. So here's where we'll set those props. Let's see. Just expand that. Let's share props. There we go. So now we have our user that we've shared. And we go to the next page, and we still have our user, even though we didn't pass any props to that. It's just through this shared thing. So it's really great for like global functions. So in my early example with David Hannemeyer Hansen, all of his products are really, really server-based. So even things as little as like a user menu. You think if you log in, and you can click your avatar and get some options. He drives all of that from the back end. He sends HTML over the wire to populate that menu whenever you expand it. You can kind of do the same thing, except you don't have to deal with that delay of, hey, give me the HTML, and then the front end renders it for you. It's actually really, really handy and easy to just use these shared functions to like have global state that you want all the time, like navigation menus. And so with that, it's really great. So now you no longer have to know on your front end which URL is active to give you kind of an active state in a navigation menu, for example. You can let your backend, because your backend knows what route you're requesting, so it knows if that's the current one. So your backend can just provide all of that JSON for you, and then you can just build a front end with your favorite framework, and you can go from there. So it's actually really, really fast, because now we're using our backend router /page. Hey, render this component for me, and whether you are accessing it directly /page or you navigate it using Inertia, it gives you the right things. And so there's other tricks that you can do with Inertia. Let's say you only want to load certain things. So in our example, the user is getting generated every time. So if you look here, you can tell the ID is changing every single time. That's because it's getting generated each request. So, but what if we wanted just to reload this value? Like we didn't care about the user. We kind of want to reduce the request size or this response size. Depending on all of the shared state that you had, it could be really big. So let's kind of like use a scalpel and say, actually, we only want to reload this value for whatever reason. So what would that look like? So Inertia, if I request this, and we look at the request headers, you can see that the x inertial partial data headers, you can see that the x inertial partial data header is asking for just value. It's saying, hey, I want just the value prop. Ignore everything else. Don't send me anything else. and then we're saying that it's a partial component for page and just in the value. So it actually only takes a few lines to generate this, kind of this logic. So here we'll just kind of pull away our props here. And then I have this, I've installed a helper function called pick. And so this is just it takes an object and just picks the properties you want, which is exactly what we're looking for. So I'm gonna check, is this a partial request? And we're looking for this header here at the bottom, wherever it went. So this X inertia partial component, which I have here. So we can just say, is this partial? Request, headers, get, inertia, header, partial component. And then we're going to check if it's equal to the current component, because that's kind of the trick that it's using, is it's a partial component for page, the page component, which is just our source pages page.view. So if it's partial, we know that it's going to send whatever the current page component is. So then we're going to check if it's partial, and then we're going to check that only header here, partial data. And it's going to be partial only, because there's also a partial to exclude, except. So it's kind of like the either or. You can pick just the ones you want, or you can say, oh, give me everything except this thing. So then this is just going to be a string that we're going to parse here. So we're going to say the field, yeah, sure, only. And it's going to be an array string because we're just going to split this just by the comma. So it's going to bark at me saying that it could be null, but I'm going to find what I don't care. And then instead of this dot props here, we don't want to set that just yet. So we're going to say this dot props, sorry. I'm going to say, I'll set that here. We're going to do it left because that way we can override it if we want to. And then we're just going to say pick props. And again, that's TypeScript, blah, blah, blah. Anybody any TypeScript friends in here? Yeah? Sometimes it's more pain than it's worth. So then, now we're going to only request that. Oh, but it doesn't like something. What's sending props again? So as you can see now, if we go back, you can see our user is changing, but now only the value is changing. And if we look at the request, the response, our prop, only the props are the value prop is gets sent back, and that's really, really helpful. Maybe there's things that you only want to inject as you need it. So the same thing is with exclude, but I'm not going to go over that right now. The really cool thing I really like is now this deferred. And it's actually really a simple concept. What we can do is sometimes we have maybe like an expensive request. Like you're hitting the database, maybe you're fetching a lot of results, but you don't want that to slow down the page. You can kind of have that classic loading state, whether it's like a loader spinny thingy or a skeleton UI. You're telling the user, hey, something's coming, it's just hold on a second, rather than them sit there at the blank screen and wait for the request to come in. So it's actually really, really clever in that instead of just setting props just like to any kind of arbitrary thing, like a number, an object, or a string, whatever we want, if we wrap it in a function, we don't have to call that function only when we need that prop. So in this page, I'm going to say, where did I go? This deferred is just going to be, I'm expecting it to be a string. So here, I'm just going to call this deferred, and I'm going to just return another random UUID, but we're only going to run that when we call that function. So it's actually a really, really simple solution to having this deferred state, this deferred properties that you want. So here, all we have to do is check whether any of these are functions. So it's going to be a partial request because it's going to say, so that's the logic of except. So if it is partial and the request headers have that deferred what's it called? Actually, it's going to be only two. It's going to be sending the only function here. So what we can do is just double this logic here. So we can say object. So we're going to mess about with this, and then we're going to do a little bit of reduce on this. And what is it telling me? So the carry is going to be a string, and it's going to be anything, although TypeScript doesn't like any, so we're just going to not do that for the sake of brevity. So then we can just check if the value is a function. And if it is, we're just going to call that function, and then we're just going to kind of return that back. So we're just preserving everything, but only calling the things that we wanted to call. So we can, so our value is getting loaded. I think this reduce is not right. I'm going to pull an audible and just copy my working solution. Shh. Don't tell anyone I cheated. So we can reload the value, and now we can load the deferred. So it only is going to load this deferred when we want it to. And we can do that anytime we want. So what that looks like on the deferred, how it's meant to work is you can just, sometimes you can load it after the fact immediately, or sometimes you can load it when the page loads. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. It actually just this simple adapter, which we just did it in 30 minutes. It's obviously not complete, but you get the general idea of you could BYO backend and slap inertia between that and your favorite front-end framework, and you really aren't tied in, you're not locked into any kind of particular technology. You can port this over. Deno could be used in a lot of different ways. Even this Oak, this is actually compatible with Node itself, with Deno, with Bun, which is another JavaScript runtime. You can run this with Cloudflare workers. There's a lot of options that you can do now with serverless technologies. There's already an adapter for Laravel because that's kind of what kickstarted it. There's an adapter for Rails. There's tons of community adapters for Django, a lot of backend frameworks, because it's actually just such an easy thing to implement. So some of the really cool things that are coming down the pike. Right now, for a long time there was like a little bit of fear that Deno, or not Deno, but Inertia was going to become unsupported because the creator actually joined Tailwind Labs to work on Tailwind CSS, which is awesome, but it kind of left the community high and dry. And then Laravel started using it and adopting it a lot, and actually their core team has now kind of taken over like the developments. And so when they did that, they kind of like jump-started it again, and so now they have a version 2 that's in beta right now. That's I'm just going to demo some of the really cool features that I really like that are coming. They kind of like really kickstart this to really like a lot of really useful features that before weren't really possible, but now you don't really have to reach in for those manual APIs anymore, and you can just enjoy your front-end framework that you like and use every day, and then your backend can just do it, trickle this data toward you whenever you need it at these routes that you know. So again, this is just the regular props we've been dealing with. So lazy props, that's kind of what we just did with the deferred. So we're just gonna load the list as we need it. It could be anything. Each time it's gonna send it back. So if you look in the back end, here's just the default. Hey, Inertia, we're gonna render this index thing and just get a random user from the database. And then this one, we're just gonna call this lazy thing, which again is just a wrapper around setting the right headers, checking the right headers, and doing all that magic for us. And we just pass in a function to say, hey, get a random list of UUIDs, just so we can see how it works. And yeah, the value never changes, but the list always changes. If we refresh, now there's a new UUID, but our list is changing. So deferred props, this is where you give them the data initially, and that longer loading data can come as you need it. So here, we're giving it a loading state because it's a long processing thing. In the back end, I'm just sleeping for a few seconds. So here's my expensive data, and I'm gonna just defer this. So hit the page, Inertia is gonna send a request right away. So if we look at the network logs, when I hit this, you can see that it hit deferred, but now it's hit deferred again right away. And then now we're just getting this expensive data. So it's just double sent the request, but your user has a really great experience of having the UI. They can interact with it as they need it, and that expensive request is going to just load and come whenever it's ready. And that's really great. A really great option is polling. So you can of course roll your own like WebSockets and get that real-time interactivity. That's really great user experience. An alternative is to poll the data. So maybe it's going to be changing and you want to throttle that a lot, or whatever the circumstances is. So now we're just going to poll this, and it's just going to request it every time. I'm going to close these. In our polling function here, we can stop and start the polling whenever we want, and it's only going to fetch the time. I won't suggest doing this, but let's say that you want to fetch the server time every second. So now it's polling every second, and it's just returning this time prop, and errors too, which is something else, but won't worry about that. So you can see here, the time is getting updated, but the user is never changing, even though it's just plucked a random person from the database. So then we can just stop it, restart it whenever we want. So it's a really great way to just add some simple polling and only request the data that you need using that scalpel approach. So if we stop this, the version 2 also introduces this prefetch idea. So if I clear the network, you can see that when I hover over it, it automatically hit this and got the data that we needed. So if you know that your user is likely going to hit an endpoint somewhere, or you can always do it. You can say only when they hover it, when they click it. You can kind of do that microsecond, pre-request. and it's going to cache it for you for, I think they said 30 seconds. But now when we do it, it's pretty instant. So we can see here that it's just going to request that for us when we hover over it, which is really great. And one of the last things that they added was this when visible. So sometimes, similar to like deferred props, you have something that is further down the page, and you want to use the new JavaScript API for the intersection observer. So whenever that thing, that element is on the page, actually that's when I want to request that data, not every time. So let's say we have this we're loading initial data here, and kind of just see what it looks like. There's prefetch. So we have this always load, and then we have a couple lazy functions here. So again, just a random list of things. So on this list 2, we're going to just sleep for an arbitrary amount of time. We're going to pause the request just to see what it looks like. So if I scroll down, there we have this state comes in if we keep going. So here it's taking a little longer. So that only happens when we see the page. So again, it's just about a matter of like giving your users the best experience and giving the developers the best experience as well. So you don't have to kind of implement this logic yourself. You can just leverage their built-in components. If we look at this, when visible, it has, Inertia gives you, for Vue or for React or whatever framework you're using, they just have a component and you just tell it the data that you want to get, and then it has a fallback for when the state's loading, and then when it's ready, it shows. It's actually a really, really simple, pretty elegant way to manage that part for you. So merge props, this is where maybe you're implementing an infinite scroll, which we'll see below, which is kind of combining all these great things. So if we want to paginate data, but we don't want to like wipe out all of this data. So you can see that my request here is incrementing this page prop. And so here, I'm only sending back one user at a time, but my state doesn't get wiped out. I keep whatever was existing before, and it just keeps merging those properties, just keeps appending it basically to the end of the existing array, whatever was there initially. So then when you combine all that, you get this infinite scroll functionality that now you don't really have to think about. You can just write your backend function once. You don't have to worry about implementing this, logic of when things are visible or when you're at the end of the page. And so you can just see that I can just keep scrolling, and it's requesting each subsequent page for me automatically, just with a few props. So yeah, these are some really, really great ergonomic things for version 2 that I think will be live soon. But yeah, that's kind of just a preview for that. So happy now to take a Q&A. I can't say that I'm an expert at Inertia, but I do enjoy it, and I've been using it for a while. So hopefully I'll do my best to answer any questions.
I can bring a microphone to you if you got a question. Okay.
What problem originally led you to using Inertia?
I think it was, I built an SPA, kind of the traditional one, and there was kind of this like knowledge gap of understanding the differences between your front-end router and your back-end router. And which is fine, I built the SPA, you learn, you learn how to do it. And actually I just kind of stumbled upon it by chance back in 2019. And I thought, oh, actually that's really clever to like, part of the problem with this is like the build tools is the cores, right? How do you put them together? How do you keep them in the same project? Maybe you want to keep them in the same repo. And so this scratched a lot of my pain points of like dealing with the routing in a single place and then kind of being at the right place at the right time, where I just happened to find in this blog article that was like, hey, what if we used our backend to like route for us and we don't have to think about it and we can just leverage the front-end frameworks for like what they're really, really good at. So it was a pretty unique proposition for me. And so I kind of just dove head first and built a production app when it kind of wasn't at a stable point, but it went really well actually, and nothing really changed from when I built it to when it was actually a stable version. But I kind of never looked back because you can build at such a quick pace. You don't have to. There's of course that rigmarole of like getting your front end dependencies going and getting Vite going and all that kind of stuff, that kind of headache initial things. But once you get going, like it just flows like really easily. Arbitrary pages, I can send whatever props I want. Whatever that page needs, I can send that data. I don't have to think about an API at this point when I'm just trying to build something. So yeah, it just scratched a lot of my pain points that I had.
Any other questions? All right,
I'll go for another one.
two for.
Do you use it for all your projects now? Like as many as you can?
Yeah, so I started in Tally. I think it's close to a dozen production apps that I've built with it. And I think that's just a testament. I'm not a 10x by any means, but it's just a testament to how fast it is to build. And it's just, I think that kind of feeds the developer spirit in us, right? Like if it's good, it's a great developer experience, which I think front-end frameworks generally do have a really great developer experience. When you're building the UIs, the interactivity is the libraries that are available, the kind of the sky's the limit, rather than, whatever for back-end frameworks, HTML templating languages, right? To learn that again, you can just, hey, I like this front-end framework, let's just use that. So yeah, I definitely will reach for it. It's my go-to for sure. I think it's given, like, I don't know how many are involved in the Laravel ecosystem, but they kind of took it on pretty heavily. So all of their, when you start a new Laravel project, you can actually already have it baked in for you. Some of their starter templates come with it baked in as well. It's actually just, I think a lot of people realize the velocity that you can create web apps is really, really quickly. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
I know you said you didn't have a terrific lot of experience, but is there one pitfall? You're like, oh, but that got me once, and I'd really prefer, maybe I need to use a different tool for that specific case.
Yeah, I think there were a lot, especially with the infinite scroll things. I never tried to do it a lot, but I read a lot of forum posts about people who were like, yeah, this is a huge headache. The problems I'm running into. And for that, the great thing is you have it's at the end of the day, it's still a front-end framework and a back-end framework. And you can just implement the APIs yourself. You can roll that component you need yourself. And so the gotchas are really just, you can just do it a different way. You don't always have to use the inertia request. You can just use a plain old, whether it's Axios or Fetch to pull that endpoint that you want. One thing I didn't really touch on that I'll just share really briefly is, of course, you're going to have forms, right? That's inevitable with a web app is you're going to have forms. So they have this really great, so this is kind of the traditional view. They have a really great form helper that kind of encapsulates the request into a form object as well. So whenever you make the request, it automatically will catch, when there's a validation response and then kind of hydrate those errors for you. So it's kind of no-brainer, such an ergonomic thing to have that built in for you. You can just call, form dot whatever, whatever HTTP verb you want to use, and it just does it for you. It's so ergonomic, it's so great to use. I didn't touch on it because it wasn't really relevant, but yeah, that's a huge, huge win.